Original or should I just it was original. Sorry. So I just put errors on.
Okay, sure. It's gonna be confusing. All right, guys, let's get started. Welcome to the pre-quarter round of SCARS 2014. Well done. For making it this far, congratulations to all the teams. My name is Hazem. I will be chair of this round. To my left, paneling with me is Sahal, and on my right, the motion that we are debating today. This House believes that the U.S. should pay ransoms to terrorist groups in exchange for the U.S. citizens taken hostage. Without further ado, I invite the Prime Minister to stand up and deliver a speech on the motion that stands in his name. Hear, hear.
When the lives of US citizens and soldiers are at stake, it's okay to forget about these absolute policies and principles when in the end, we can save countless lives and in the end, boost the morality of the state and the citizens in the state. But before I move on to my argument on why it's justifiable to forget these absolute principles for utilitarian purposes, a few characterizations on what we are trying to fight for. Right. Firstly, terrorist groups are radical. We can all agree to that. And they don't give in to reason. The only way to save these people is to follow their demand or ransom. No matter what, we believe that when you follow their ransom, in the end, we get to save lives and it's better than what side opening might be fighting for. And also that these people have legit motives, but they don't push for it. But they push for it in the wrong way. For example, Boko Haram just doesn't want Western ideas, but they push to it in the wrong way. Right, moving on to my first argument on why it's justifiable to forget these absolute principles for utilitarian purposes. First level of analysis. Why are these abstract principles that we are fighting for set up? This gives a sense to the morality of US citizens or soldiers that are going to fight against these terrorists. Because if they publicly show their soldiers tortured or even beheaded, don't you think that lowers their morality and they don't get as much support from the citizens and the soldiers themselves? So we believe that morality is a very important thing in this debate, which I'll further elaborate in my analysis. Second level of analysis, how is morality better on our side? The idea of being proud of not giving into terrorists is non-existent when you let these people die just because you don't want to give in to their demand or ransom. Wait, before I move on, yes.
They are pushing it from a wrong point of view, like exactly what you said. Why are you empowering them? We are telling them it's a legitimate action to gain legitimacy.
Because we believe that saving these people boosts the morality as a whole, and more people give in to support to go against these terrorists. Because it's like if you publicly show them getting tortured or beheaded, don't you think that lowers the morality? I'll explain what's the importance of morality later. Moving on to my analysis. All right, if you morality is better on our side because people feel demoralized of things like death, torture, incapacitation, and these are things that publicly shown by these terrorist groups. So in the end, people get demoralized, and the abstract principles, the absolute principles does not help the morality if people, please sit down, if people see the terrorist groups doing all sorts of stuff to their US soldiers or citizens still. All right. Moving on to my third analysis on why is it good to negotiate and pay ransom to these terrorists. All right. Firstly, obviously you're gonna save soldiers and people's lives under the hands of these terrorists. And the best, and as I said earlier, it's the best way to boost the morality and in the end save more lives. And if you pay ransom to these terrorists, the terrorist group will actually lose leverage because they cannot instill fear in other people. They cannot lower down the morality because if the US are actually helping their citizens and make sure that their citizens have high morale and keeps on supporting the US, don't you think that the terrorists has loses leverage because they can't instill fear in other people, and so that they'll in the end lose a lot of leverage. Sit down. And also, if you let these people from the terrorists were in captivation of these terrorists, they can let out information about these terrorist groups, like what are their plans, what do they do to people. So if you like release them or save these people who were from terrorist camps or terrorist places, we believe that they can get more information which will help the US in further strikes. But before I move on, any points? Closing.
So we talk about people feeling demoralized, right? But right now, when we start to negotiate with ransoms, terrorist groups realize that the United States now have a pressure point to getting financial aid from them because you pay ransom. Now, how does this make it feel to society that now society knows that the terrorists have exploited our pressure point to get financial aid?
Okay, we believe that financial pressure point is not like doesn't outshine the people's lives that already sent to the US. They sacrifice themselves for the country. We believe that if they're still alive, they deserve to be safe because they've already sacrificed so much for their country. So we believe that financial exploitation of the US finances is not that much of a big deal. All right, moving on to my elaboration on all right, you see now when US made these policies on not paying ransoms for terrorists, many citizens always question the US. Why are they intervening with like wars and stuff when they can't even take care of what's happening to their own soldiers? Like if they're to ignore the people on the ground, like the US citizens or soldiers, why should they like care about other stuff like intervening wars, intervening problems within other countries when the country itself is not settled with their own soldiers, their own problems? So we believe that if they can't settle their own problems, they shouldn't try to go, like settle other people's problems. And we believe the problem here is that they are not saving the lives of people, of their own people, and like focusing on other smaller things. And right, moving on to my fourth analysis, what happens if they don't pay ransom? If these people don't pay, if the US doesn't pay ransom, like the terrorists will obviously use these soldiers as slaves and whatnot, because this is very harmful, because the US soldiers who are originally fighting for the US are forced to fight for these terrorist groups and enslaved and do whatever the terrorist groups want, because that if you don't pay ransom and don't save them, obviously they're either going to torture them, slave them, or kill them. We believe that's unfair because they already sacrificed so much for the country. Moving on, even if like they're not like, if they publicly showed people being beheaded and being tortured, all it loses morale of the people, which leads to my link. Why is morale very important under our paradigm? Because when people have more morale, when they see their state saving lives, don't you think they'll be more supportive of the state? They're saying that our state cares about our people, like, so that what we should support them, because like we always get support from our state. Whereas in this, what's happening in status quo, people are questioning the US for not settling their own problems. So we believe that if we do this, that means the terrorist groups themselves are actually feeling leverage, losing leverage, and the people within the US are getting more supportive of the US, and US will have higher morality, which will help in the future. With that, we are proud to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and now to call upon the Leader of Opposition to present side opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the problem with inside opening government, right, is that they are only fighting for a short-term benefit. And on our side, we tell you that actually under their paradigm, it's actually going to bring a long-term harm. But before I carry on with my characterization, some rebuttals coming from the Prime Minister, some rebuttals on the Prime Minister's speech, right? So he said that these terrorist groups, they are radical and that they push things the wrong way. And it's true. They push it the wrong way, and that's exactly the harm, because when you concede to their terms and when you agree with them and you tell them, okay, so if you want to take my citizens, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to as long as I get them back. And this is extremely harmful, right? Yeah. Because you empower what the terrorists are trying to do and you legitimize their act. And this proves to you that when the state actually, when US actually accept the terms of these terrorists, this tells you, this indirectly paints you a picture that that these terrorists have a leverage over the US, and this is extremely harmful. And they also said that under their paradigm, they can actually guarantee and save these individuals. We tell you no, okay? That's absolutely not true. Because when you legitimize the act of these terrorists and you agree with them, you concede to them, this is where they will take advantage because they are radical individuals. We have to keep that in mind. Therefore, they will increase the price of the ransom, where it's not necessarily when the government pay $1 million for certain individuals, these terrorists are going to give them back. They're obviously going to take advantage of the US and increase the prices. And this is extremely harmful, right? Because you have to realize that in status quo, the legitimacy of these terrorists are extremely low. And when you concede to them, you increase this legitimacy, and it's extremely harmful not only to the US, but also to other countries as a whole. But I'll prove that later on in my speech. So, look, first level characterization, right? We have to keep in mind that these terrorists, they are a group of extremely radical individuals who prove things the wrong way, like what the Prime Minister has conceded to. So therefore, their ideologies don't fit into society. And that is why in status quo, their legitimacy is extremely low. And when you actually concede to them, you increase that. You see, look, they want to prove a point. They want to tell everyone, they want to tell the world that they have a point to prove. They want to tell people, look, this is our way and we want you all to follow it. And when the US, who has a huge influence over the world, agree to it, concede to the facts, this is where it's going to be extremely harmful, because just because they are putting in billions of money just to save a certain individual, you have to realize that this brings a long-term harm, because when the state actually concedes to what these terrorist groups want to do, this tells you that they actually listen to these terrorists, and whatever the terrorists say, they'll do it in order to get their citizens back, and that's extremely harmful. Sit down. Look, ransom is also often used to gain attention from a specific country, because these terrorists, they need that attention, and that they will say, if you don't pay this ransom, we are going to kill this individual. But when the state concedes to this and they pay the ransom, this is extremely harmful, because these terrorist groups, you have to bear in mind that they are radical, they do things the wrong way, and they're extremists, and that is where they will increase the price and take advantage of it. Look, in status quo, negotiations with terrorists are unrecommended, and it doesn't happen by the US, right? Because we have to realize that when you actually listen to these terrorists, this won't end their acts. Therefore, it will lead to a long-term harm, because when these terrorists know, okay, if I ask the US to pay me ransom, then they will do it. Therefore, it will incentivize them to do it even more, because they know that people are going to concede to them. When a big country like US, who has such a huge influence throughout the world, concedes to this terrorist groups, this is extremely harmful, because what about those other countries who don't have the capacity to actually pay this ransom? It's extremely harmful, right? Look, why is it in status quo that these negotiations are unrecommended? Firstly, these terrorists are irrational, and their stance within them is that they want to prove something, they want to prove a point, they want to gain attention throughout the world. And we tell you that by conceding to their ransom and paying it and listening to them, that's not the right way. That's extremely harmful. Look, their aim in achieving the stance are not positive stance. First of all, they're not positive stances. What they're doing is not right, you see. And they don't even reflect social norms in society. For example, ISIS, they take hostages and they behead journalists. And we tell you that when the state actually pays ransom, it's extremely harmful. Look, because they're trying to gain attention, and we believe that this form of attention isn't what we want, because the US, they do have the liability to stop this, but this attention must be to stop these terrorists so that they don't do it in the future. When they have the liability and they actually listen to these terrorists and take their ransom, this won't stop them. This will just make them do it more. But before I move on, sure.
If I am a US citizen and I see my father as a soldier being beheaded, don't you think I wouldn't mind conceding into what the terrorist wants in exchange for my family and my soldiers, my comrades being back home safely, instead of seeing the visceral effects of their head coming off and them screaming.
Okay, look, when a certain individual, they want their family member to come back, you have to remember that even if that family member comes back, there are many other people whose lives are even more at stake now that these terrorists know that US is going to opt into their option, right? Plus, when they do it, US are put on a lower platform, you see, because accepting their terms don't stop them. This actually incentivizes terrorists to do it more to gain attention. And you are indirectly legitimizing this act of terrorists when you opt into their circumstances. Because even if it's a short-term benefit, the long-term harm, which I have proved already, when you incentivize them, is you're just giving them a platform to do it again and again and again with you conceding to it. You see, and it's even more harmful when US accept it because this affects other countries. And I already proved to you how US is influential, right? And this actually increases the vulnerability of other countries. See, and this is extremely harmful. So why is it legitimate to not opt in? Because I've already proven to you that these terrorists are irradical. And under our stance, we still protect the citizens in the long term, which is much, much better. So on a comparative analysis, right, on their aim to delegitimize terrorists and improve their morale, we prove to you that under our side, because we do not legitimize this act and we don't concede to them, therefore preventing the long-term harm. With that, I proudly oppose.
Thank the Leader of Opposition for his speech, and I'll call on the Deputy Prime Minister to continue side government space. Here.
Mr. Speaker, when I see many people dying, when I see the beheading of people like what ISIS does, we start to question how is the government protecting us? Why are these people dying, right? We think that if you concede to certain things, that doesn't necessarily mean you're legitimizing their stances, you're legitimizing their means of doing stuff. But in the end, you're just protecting your citizens, you're protecting the morality of the people. Because this is what Ben said that they completely ignored. The main reason why the US set up the principles that we should not negotiate with terrorists is for the main reason that we don't acknowledge them so that people will feel more empowered, right? We think that empowerment is better under our side. When you can save these people, when these people have been captured and you see them come back, we think that it's much, much better under our side. People will be more willing to fight out instead of being so demoralized. That I saw the visceral effects of these people beheading when these people have a leverage over us where they can behead people, right? I'm going to prove in my substantive later why the leverage that these people have is best to pay them, and it's okay and legit and justified to give financial aid towards them instead of these people dying as a whole, right? But before that, many rebuttals. This is what they said. Now, if we concede into them, we are empowering the ways that they do things, right? No, we think that the people, these terrorist groups are already so empowered already. They are already so proud of themselves already. We managed to capture these soldiers. We managed to have these people. We have so much power over you, the US, right? So when the US opts into their policy, right, we think that number one, first of all, the people of the US are empowered. When they're already so disempowered already, when they're already so demoralized that they lost their people already, we think that this further makes them better and all. But how does this affect the terrorist groups as a whole, right? Because in the end, if they don't opt into it, they'll still feel empowered by cutting off their heads and showing it to the US to see the people being sad, to see people being scared. So no matter what, the terrorists will always feel happy, will always feel proud of what they're doing, right? So in the end, what do we do best? Is that even if they feel proud, at least we make the US citizens, the US people, the US soldiers, at least they also feel the empowerment that these are the people that we lost, but at least my government is protecting us, and at least we got our people back. Sit down. Then this is what they say, that people will feel demoralized, that the US people will feel demoralized if we give in to their financial aid. If I was a US citizen, right, and my people have been captured and all, I don't give a damn if my country gives them money or anything. I give a damn if these people are actually coming home, if these people are actually safe, right? We think that these are the types of things that make people people don't really care about whether you give in into it or not. We think people care whether their people are safe, whether their people dying. Thirdly, this is what they say. It's a feasibility problem because you increase the price. That's not how things work. You set a ransom, US pays the price, people come back, right? We don't think that you'll be, hey, no, increase the price. We think that maybe if the increase of price will only happen if we capture the soldiers, they pay us, and the second time we capture people, then we'll do it. But this will lead on to one, I'll explain this in my rebuttal later, which is now, right? They say that this is an incentive to do it more. On the counter hand, right, if the US really cares, then it's an incentive for the US to care for the people more, right? We'll make sure that the generals don't send these people to dangerous missions, unnecessary missions that could get them captured as a whole. We think that the US will protect its citizens more, will make sure that they won't be able to help hold these people captive, and we think that it's a lot better on our side when the US has better care and better things. Before I'm wait, stay. Okay, so one of the things that Ben said that we won't really engage on, right? We see that first of all, these innocent people already died in the fight. Number two, these soldiers, this is principal justification, right? The soldiers that do come back, at least they can also fight. And the information and how they know they torture these people, right? Because obviously these terrorists will come and tell. Obviously, these terrorists will probably interrogate, like, where's your base and stuff like that, right? If these soldiers actually told them where their base is or any information about the people itself, at least the soldiers can come back and tell the US, these are the things that they know and these are the things that we need to change. Secondly, we think that civilians can be used as slaves or sex slaves, such as Boko Haram when they took the 200, when they constantly kidnap people and make them their sexual slaves, make them their slaves to do their jobs for them. We think a lot of children are forced into action and forced into fights in most terrorist groups. We don't think we should allow this to happen, or because we're giving them financial aid, we think we can stop this from happening. Before I move on to my substantive, yes.
How is it empowerment to society? Prove to society that your government is now continuing the terrorist actions and that we are now vulnerable to terrorists because we allow their platform.
It's disempowering for the people when they realize that the US didn't do things well and the people got captured. It's even more demoralizing when you see them getting beheaded by ISIS. People will be very scared. But it's very empowering to see that once your government screwed up by letting these people get captured, at least they're doing their job in getting these people back by at least paying the financial aid, right? Why is my substantives? Number one, how this leads to better negotiations with terrorists, right? Because number one, both sides agree. Okay, actually, they didn't really get. Okay, what is outside thing, right? Terrorists do have a legitimate goal. Like Boko Haram, they just don't oppose Western ideals. It's just that they have the wrong way to do it, right? We even see in Malaysia, PAS isn't a terrorist group, but they still want hudud law, right? PAS could be a terrorist group, but no, they're doing legitimate ways to fight for their ideology, right? We think that terrorist groups can be neutralized if we at least listen to what they want and tell them why you shouldn't have it. We think that negotiations will be better under our side, right? Because let's just realize, right, terrorist groups are very staunch in their beliefs. That's why they're actually doing the ways to do it, right? If we keep on fighting against them, then they're more incentivized to fight even more because they're not going to give up on their stance. So how is the best way to make them give up and make them realize what they're doing wrong, right? Because if you have more negotiations with them, when we actually talk to them about what you're doing wrong, right? We don't think that telling them, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, and you're like, yeah, I am doing the wrong thing. We don't think that will happen. But at least when you negotiate with them, you can come on to settle, you can come with terms, you can say, okay, I can give you this, but you stop doing this. We can tell them, don't you put down your arms and then we will give you this, right? We think that it's a lot better because in the end, you can save people's lives, you can come to more concessions, and in the end, we can de-radicalize them because in the end, if they want something, then maybe we can make a few concessions. If they stop harming other people, we think it's extremely legitimate, right? But let's just say they want political legitimacy, like most terrorist organizations do, right? If we actually give them the political legitimacy, they won't kill anyone, but he won't be elected if people really object them, right? So we think that in the end, it's a lot better to make sure that they aren't radicalized, that they aren't trying to use bad means. Why do we think it's justified to give financial aid in exchange for the people? Because what is the best leverage? Because in the end, right, this money towards these terrorist groups mean nothing when they have the people, right? Because when they actually have civilians and all, that's when they can manipulate the government in a sense. So why do we think it's best that you actually pay the money, like you be manipulated by giving financial aid? Because this financial aid means nothing to the US government. The people do. US has a lot of money, right? So even if these terrorist organizations can buy more guns and stuff like that, we think the US can always overpower them, but they can never get the citizens back. So we think that instead, in the choice of losing your soldiers, your citizens, and losing your money, the US has a lot of disposable money, but we don't think citizens are disposable. We are very proud to propose.
thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. Now let's call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue side opposition's case. Here. Here, people. Wake up.
Thank you, Hazel. It's a form of illusion when Luke comes up here and tells you that it's an empowerment within your country and we want the state to care about the people on the ground. That form of empowerment you put upon people that sure, maybe that short-term benefit that I'm not talking about, this plain is wrong. In the case where you tell them that sure, we want to get you back, but it's also a short-term benefit. When I'm talking to you about how you empower terrorist groups because you give them a platform for them to do this again, that is a form of harm that we won't talk about in our policy. But we're also going to prove to you how in a case where your aim is to now delegitimize these terrorist groups, like to create peace, is better achieved within our policy. Several levels of rebuttals for you today, right? First, he talks about how you're not legitimizing them. It's some form of just conceding once upon a time. Look, no. The form of legitimizing is the act where you concede to the terrorist acts in the case where you tell them that we legitimize your acts and we tell you that this is a form of leverage they have upon us. That if you take our citizens, we lay our hands down, we will concede to your actions. But secondly, how is that also a further harm in your case? That sure, that conceding that one time is okay. No. If you give them a platform, you tell them this is a way that if you ever do this again, we will obtain your system of ransom. That is the form of harm we want to talk about. There is no reverse policy in a case like this. Anytime a terrorist group obtains your citizens, that is a form of policy to regulate that. You do not regulate that. You do not regulate the actions of terrorist groups. You do not delegitimize that terrorist group because you tell them that this is one that form of way, and this is something I will concede to if your actions were ever to do so. Secondly, he talked about how you're increasing morale, showing them that we care. Look, the protection is an illusion. In case like this, we're sure you get those people back, but what is the future harm that could exist is that it's going to happen again. And why is this going to happen again? When we analyze the situation, the mentality of terrorists is that this is that form of attention that we give to them, and this is that form of legitimacy that we give to them in actions where we tell them that sure, you do this once again, but we tell you that the high chance of them doing it again is higher. So that form of illusion they want to talk about is that sure, you get these people back, and sure, in a case like this, you do continue, you give them ransom. The form of morale that you put upon society is that you delegitimize your government as a whole. You put upon a leverage and you tell people that look, our government to an extent does have a stance against terrorists, but in the case where you want to do this, we will opt into your system, and therefore delegitimizing your government. And you show the government and you show people that this is how strong our government is, where they will still opt into terrorist groups. That's the problem in a case like this. I'll prove to that later in my speeches, right? But secondly, he talked about how people don't care, and people don't care if people opt into the system, right? Meaning people on the ground don't care if the government opts in. That people care in a case where it's a long-term harm, in a case where you show people that when you delegitimize your government as a whole. Now, what do we mean by this? In a case where you tell people that there are certain leeways where the government will opt into terrorist groups, that is the harm. The stance the US carries in a case like this, where they tell people that our stance against negotiations and our stance against opting to terrorist groups is very fine because we realize and we analyze the situation that it will not end there. You negotiate with terrorists, you give them a platform to practice whatever they want to do, it will not end there. They always want more legitimacy. They will use this platform to gain more legitimacy from you. So even within your policy, you tell them that we give you all forms of political empowerment. That is the harm as a whole. You legitimize the groups of terrorists, you legitimize their actions. In the case where you tell IS that we will do this and we won't want to take people back, you empower the idea of them going to borders of Egypt or borders of any other country and doing it as a whole. The actions of the US empower the idea on how it affects other countries as a whole. When US opt into this system, what is the effect you play upon other countries? When you tell the US, especially since we already told you that they're already so influential in a case like this, that is the harm they propose upon other countries. Other countries don't have the capacity to do this, but you legitimize this act, and other terrorist groups use this against their country. They do not have the capacity to get the people back, but they also do not want to opt into such a system. They want to legitimize this. That is the problem within your policy. But before that, Regina.
What your side does makes people disposable. Prove to me why the value of a human US citizen life is worth less than your American agenda.
Look, it's even worse within your policy when there's a high chance of them doing it again and there's more people that are going to get hurt within your policy. I'll prove that to you in my speech today also, right? But before that, let's look at several levels of clarification. No, look, sit down. Look, when we want to talk about the idea of empowerment, that is a trade-off we're willing to take, right? The idea of empowerment that we want to talk about is that we have a strong government in a case like this that also has a fine lines on what we do within terrorist groups and what we don't do within terrorist groups. That is a form of empowerment within society we want to talk about. In a case like this where your government does opt into a system and they tell you, sure, we want to make sure with terrorist groups because the aim within our policies that we want to legitimize this. We want that harm to stop. That does not happen because of several reasons. Firstly, we have to realize that terrorist groups right now don't have that form of platform to to practice that right. So in society right now, if the government tells you that we do not want to opt into your system, that's also delegitimizing an act as a whole. But in a case like this, when you tell these people they want to legitimize your act, you incentivize them to do even more, because you realize in case of terrorist minds is that firstly we are already so radical, we do not have a platform. Any chance we get to interact with your government, we will take that chance and we will empower what we're going to do. Therefore, the idea of them necessarily making or increasing the ransom as a whole, or telling you that sure, at the first basis that we want to pay you 1 billion, but the chances of them saying that no, if you're willing to do something, you're willing to do even more after this. In the case where you're willing to say that you're paying 1 billion, they can easily ask you, then give me political legitimacy, give me that form of rights. They will always increase the bargain because they want that form of legitimacy as a whole. You incentivize these people to do so. That is how we want to talk about. But before that, also let's get an idea on why it's legitimate for US to opt out of the system, for them to keep within a stance to the society. But before that, go.
Okay, so if you think that the incentive for the terrorists to take more people is when the US pays into ransom, right? Even if the US doesn't pay for the ransom, the incentive is always there because you can behead more people, you can scare more people. So no matter what, the terrorist organizations will always try to capture more people. The incentive is there on your side.
The incentives is when you legitimize the act and you talk, but that this will work. If you behead my people, I will opt into your system. That's when you legitimize the act. In the case you have a frontline stance saying that no, even if you do that, here is why we don't do so, because we realize that if you opt into your system, you will always want more. That is how they propose to their policy. Right? But also, let's get why it's legitimate for them to not opt into their system. We have to realize they've already proven to you that terrorists are radical, right? There's a high chance of them doing it again. Why do we have to analyze the minds of terrorism and the minds of terrorists as a whole? Because we think as a whole, when you have the government which is not when you have the US which is now principally inconsistent on their stance of the terrorist groups, that is the future harm they propose to their policy. But also, sure, the state has the liability to protect society right now, but the state also has the liability to prove that the long-term harm does not exist in their policy. The long-term harm exists in a case like this, where you legitimize the terrorist group and you tell them that if you that this is the one of the platforms that you that if you do so, I will opt into your system. That is the harm they propose within their policy. But also, right, what it shows towards other terrorist groups when you legitimize this action is that not other terrorist groups will also opt into the system and that form of when you show that this is going to work, that is when other terrorist groups will also do so, right? But also, we want to talk about how you give that platform to that platform to those terrorists. It's even more harmful because it sets a bad precedence to how they're going to ask you for more things as a whole. Sure, you pay attention to what they want, and when you do that, that's when you pay attention to the more legit to what they want in case where they can take advantage of you. You do not focus your act on stopping that particular terrorist group. You focus your act on getting that people back. You also focus on the attention that you put upon that group, right? So also in a case like this, what happens to the US when you do concede to several factors like this, right? In a case like this, where US is concede, you also tell people the US is the form of body that although they have the legitimacy and they have the hard stance into proving into telling that terrorist groups are not legitimate. When you take this stance to telling them that these people, and when US opt into the system, that's when you're principally inconsistent with what the US stand for. You empower the idea of terrorist groups being doing so again.
Thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for her speech. Now to begin the closing half of the debate, I invite the Member of Government to begin closing government space. Here.
Mr. Speaker, we think when we're talking about US citizens, people not only like soldiers, but individuals like news correspondents, tourists. When we're talking about soldiers, right? And if you want to say these are individuals who have consented to die, we think there's a difference between you as a US soldier consenting to die overseas and you being sentenced to death. We think even more so for individuals like tourists and news correspondents who never asked to be put in this situation. We think, therefore, you cannot make these people disposable. We think making them disposable allows you as a state to say, I don't care about you, and therefore antagonizes the state. We think this amounts to a lot of harms, and this is where I'm going to be uniquely extending from closing government. But before that, some rebuttals or some responses on opening opposition, right? The whole crux of that case was this is a short-term benefit and a long-term harm, and we cannot legitimize them at any cost because they'll continue to abuse this, right? We think, firstly, that legitimizing them moderates them, right? Because we allow them to understand that we are making concessions and that we are willing to be able to talk to them. And we think this is good. We think even if you say that they will continue to abuse this and continue to be a lot more hardline, that that there will be factions of that terror group that will splinter off. They will moderate and they will lose numerical support in numbers. And we think that's a good thing. And we think this is something that can continue to happen over time. But secondly, even if they increase the price, we would still pay the ransom because we still think the worth of the US
citizens that they have is a lot more important than fulfilling their political agenda. And second response, right, on this idea that we set a bad precedence for other countries who can't pay. Yeah, firstly, we think the worth of our citizens is worth a lot more than that. But secondly, we don't think this is a big problem anyway, because terror groups aren't that interested in people who come from these countries. They're not as interested as taking someone from Myanmar than they are from the US, because one, they can't pay that ransom anyway, and secondly, they don't have a vested political interest in those countries. But thirdly, on this idea that people will care, that people will understand that there is a greater agenda, there is a greater objective that we're doing this for. We don't think so. We think the world only extends as far as your front door. I'm not going to care what ISIS is doing in Syria. I'm not going to care what they're doing in Nigeria with Boko Haram, but I am going to care that they have my mother, they have my friend, they have someone who's close to me and that I love. And we think that poses a lot more harms on your side because because these people antagonize the state. They think this is the state that doesn't care about me and I shouldn't care about them. It makes it a lot more worse for social cohesion at the end of the day, right? But thirdly, we think on this idea that they will continue to raise their bargaining price to get things like political representation, recognition. We think these are good things. These are things we should strive for. We think these terror organizations are people who have only resorted to taking up arms when they were rejected that political representation and recognition in the first place. This is something we would happily give them. Okay, I'll take him.
The stance of what there is to fight for is still the same. If you concede to that, you also empower that their stance will not change, because you empower the idea that their stance will work in a case like this, so you do concede, right?
No, we think if you make concessions, you open that door for negotiation. We think it might take a long time, but it's a risk we're willing to take, and we think it's a benefit we have on our side. But I have two extensions for you today, right? Number one, why we can't make people disposable, and secondly, why moderating these terrorist groups is the most important thing to do at the end of the day. Firstly, right, why your side makes people disposable and why that's bad. We think you now turn American citizens into just another pawn in the game for the American objective, right? Someone you can just throw away when they have no value to you anymore. We think, number one, this is bad because they aren't pawns. They are citizens. They are like all people. They're mothers, their brothers, their fathers, their sisters. They all have worth. But secondly, right, even if you want to talk about soldiers who have consented to this and risking their life and things like that, we shouldn't sentence them to death. There is an implicit agreement that we have when we send them over there, that we will always have your back. We will always, if you are captured, we will always go in after you and we will always save you. We think, you risk that when you do this, right? But thirdly, the state has always allowed you to prioritize your own life because we prioritize it for you. That's why when you kill someone in self-defense, we recognize it's self-defense because we allow you that ability to be able to protect your own life at any cost. And next, right? What are the harms of allowing people to become disposable? We think, number one, if you're a soldier, you can now morally object to not carrying out the instruction to kill because it's everyone for himself, right? If the US is not going to have my back, I'm not interested in carrying out that instruction to kill, especially if it puts me in a very risky situation. But secondly, you lose the hearts and minds of people on the ground because again, these are people who understand that you don't care about me. For example, when during the Vietnam War, when we sent a lot of troops overseas when we weren't ready and basically sentencing them to death, this was horrible. We lost a lot of support from on the ground, and this was a very bad time for the United States. But onto my second extension, right? About why legitimizing terror groups moderates them, and this is a bigger purpose that we should strive for at the end of the day. Kim.
Oh,
yes.
Look, in a case like this, is there a high chance of them changing their stance, considering it's so radical? When you tell them that your actions don't work, is there a high chance of them, considering they want to be accepted in society, to change their stance and moderate themselves?
Yes, I'm going to explain this now. Okay, firstly, right, if the one thing that has united all of these terror groups in the past is their hatred towards the United States, because the United States isn't going to recognize them. The United States isn't going to understand they have legitimate objectives that should be achieved. Paying that ransom allows you to make those concessions. Paying that ransom allows you to say, okay, I understand that you have a legitimate objective, and I'm going to be able to recognize that, and I'm going to be able to give you that starting point to start that conversation, right? But why is this? Considering that you already considered that these individuals are disenfranchised, right, and they already want to be able to have that ability to talk about it. even if you want to argue abuse and saying that they'll continue to do this again, we think they won't gain legitimacy and public support like they did in the past, because now you have moderate factions that understand this idea that the US might want to make concessions to me, and maybe we should start talking to them instead. So they will be able to splinter off. They will be able to start moderate factions on the ground that will abhor at all the violent things that these individuals from these terror groups do, right? And even if it doesn't cripple them immediately, it substantially weakens them because you lose support in numbers. So when the general public in these areas see these terror groups perpetuating acts of violence, like in Al-Qaeda storming like a mall in Kenya and indiscriminately shooting people, or Sufi Muslims using guns to kill state officials in Yemen, there will be people on the ground who say this is wrong. If the US wants to be able to make concession to us and recognize our cause, then we should be able to do the same and not fight violence with violence, because that's wrong. This doesn't happen on your side. On your side, when you continue to refuse to legitimize these people, they are going to continuously hate the United States. They are going to continuously, and even worse, right? They could be able, even worse, they can start to be able to justify abducting these individuals because they just hate them. They don't have to be able to achieve a political agenda. They just hate them. And for all of these reasons, because people aren't disposable, if you believe in humanity, side with closing government.
Thank the member of opposition for his speech. Sorry, member of government for his speech. Now it's called upon the member of opposition to begin closing opposition's case. Here.
Mr. Speaker, what this debate lacks, right, is that the debate's goal is to save as many American citizens as we can. But now what comes to the problem is that we do not believe that paying ransoms is the right alternatives. So what you'll be hearing from closing oppositions is that we'll tell you the flaw in paying ransom and how it causes a lot of prolonged effects, right? And we'll give you a better alternative, which what status quo do, rescue missions. And we tell you why rescue missions, comparative to paying ransoms, play a bigger role not only in the short-term benefits, but in long-term benefits to winning the war with terrorism. Before that, let's move into a few rebuttals, right? Looking from side-opening government. They talk about two really main things. For example, utilitarian benefit. Now let me argue with this in utilitarian benefit, right? We say that we save this 1%, which is already in the minority, and by allowing to concede to save this 1%, it becomes a pressure point for the United States to bail other people out. Why do we tell you this is a pressure point, right? Because what happens when you apply that one principle on bailing this one US citizen out, what happens is when you don't do the next time, you get social pressure from everyone else. Because now you start to value your citizens on why do we want to save 1% but don't save the other. And because of the social pressure, right, the United States will start being pushed into a situation, pushed into a corner, where now every time a terror group kidnaps or abducts a US citizen, the United States will have to be concede and pay this. And we tell you this is very harmful, right? Why do we tell you this is very harmful? We've moved on into my substantive on where I prove the flaws in paying ransoms. Moving on, we talk about the argument of fear, right? We tell you that the argument of fear is with side closing opposition. Why do we tell you this, right? Because when we do not pay ransoms, we're telling terrorist groups you do not agree with what you want. What we do is that we go with rescue missions with what has happened so many times. You look, for example, what Israel did, the raid on Entebbe, and how that really shook terrorist groups, right? That we can do to a certain extent. We can come into your base, kill every one of you, and walk free with only one casualty, comparative to a whole airport being wiped out. We tell you that the state of fear will be with side closing opposition. Very simple in this stance, right? Now, what happens is that we pay ransom, right? We concede and we tell terrorist groups, right now we are begging to them. We're like plea bargaining. We're telling them, give us back and we'll give you financial aid for whatever incentive you want. What happens in rescue missions, right? There is a potential case where we agree that there will be that people will die, right? But what happens right now is that we come in and we tell terrorist groups that if you take our people, we're not fearful to fight against you to take those people. We're just not going to submit in and accept everything that you want to give us. So because of that, we tell you that side opening government, right, loses this and out of that. Now we tell you what closing government tells you, right? Well, this is the problem in the way we side closing opposition will have to concede, right? That yes, it is true, and we start doing this, we start to value our citizens. But what's more important, valuing one citizen or prolonging a war? Now this comes into a battle, right? We tell you that we start conceding into paying ransoms, right? Terrorists are going to exploit this pressure point, which will become very, very harmful towards and will benefit them. But what we tell you is when we make a strong stance and we tell terrorist groups, look, we do not agree with the way you're doing things, we do not legitimize you, and we will not negotiate with you, but what we will do is instead we'll come in there, we'll kill all of you instead, like what we've been doing in status quo, we tell you this proves a very strong point. Now coming on to the incentives of terrorists, right? We tell you opening government, right, keeps on telling us that the incentive of terrorists is also to instill fear by beheading people. But this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. We tell you that terrorists behead people with the primary objective of trying to get a ransom and the secondary objective to prove a point. Why we tell you that proving a point becomes a secondary objective, right? Because most of the terrorist groups, such as IS, spreads the propaganda internationally, hoping to recruit people. But now there is a certain amount of people which are on the borderline of trying to join the IS and trying to be rationalized. When you start beheading people, it becomes very unattractive to these people who want to fight for this cause. Because some Islamist Sunnis want an Islamic state in a peaceful way, in a democratic way, and not in a radical way. So with the IS continuously beheading people, they're proving a point that we are very radical, and they start to lose support with moderate Sunnis, right? And we tell you this is very detrimental towards the political will of the IS being recognized. Sit down, I'll take you in a while later on. Right? So moving on, let's talk about the flaws of paying ransoms, and then I will move on to why status quo is better, and we tell you what's mutually exclusive on our side, what's mutually exclusive on their side. Moving on, we talk about legitimizing the ideology, which opening opposition talk about. But now let's talk about why this is bad. Why when we legitimize the ideology and we give them financial aid, how does it prolong the war? We tell you a very simple way, right? What happens when we give them financial aid to terrorist groups such as IS, right? Therefore, now the propaganda gets spread. It becomes not only a physical war, but a psychological war, which the United States are clearly losing because the IS started recruiting people all the way down to Southeast Asia as well. Now we tell you that when it becomes strength in numbers, right, they start to kidnap more people. And when they start to kidnap more people, what happens is that the United States are now already pressured for the first time. They can be pressured continuously. Before I move on, go on.
Okay, if people want to join IS, but they are stopped because IS is radical, right? Even if IS doesn't behead people, I think people will still know that IS is very radical.
But to a certain extent, we tell you the most radical point of IS is when you behead a person in front of TV, in front of live cast. Whereas fighting a war doesn't prove a very radical part. Fighting a war fights a purpose. Where else, when you behead a person, it becomes inhumane, and therefore you lose the support of moderate Sunnis. Moving on, we tell you about how when we fight or when we pay ransoms, right, it proves the terrorist becomes invincible. Now what happens is that terrorists know there's a pressure point in the United States and they get the leverage over this war. Whenever they need something to bail them out, for example, whenever they need to show a public support and show a stance to the world that look, the United States are going to bargain for us, they're going to come to us to take their citizens there, we tell you that this is very, very bad on the influence to the whole world. Now this shows that a terrorist has an upper hand towards a certain extent. And what is that upper hand? Is that when we kidnap your citizens, you're going to give us whatever we want for you to take back the citizens. We tell you this also sets a very bad precedence, right? Because from ransoms, terrorist groups already know that the United States is going to concede. What happens, not only is ransoms increase, but we look at many other things. We look at probably political will. For example, that now, if you keep on supporting a certain part, for example, we look at the Syrian rebels and how the United States support them to a certain extent. Now, what the terrorists could do by using a precedence and say, hey, look, we'll only give back a certain number of your citizens if you stop intervening in our war, if you stop getting involved with our stuff in the Middle East. And why we tell you the United States will concede to this is because we already tell you about social pressure, about how they've already done it at the start and how they have to continue to do it to the end. Moving on, we tell you that this wouldn't prevent more kidnappings, right, which has already been talked about by opening opposition, so let's spread that off, right? Now let's talk about how status quo and what status quo do, right? We tell you mutually exclusive benefit in status quo with going in with rescue missions is that we prove a hard stance, that we do not let terrorists get a leverage upon us, but we tell terrorists, look, we're not fearful to fight with you. We're just not going to submit into your bargains, we're just going to submit into your demands, but we're going to go in there and we're going to kill you as well. But this is a potential harm from our case, and this is a potential harm from their case, right? Our potential harm is, yes, there's a risk assessment of losing soldiers, a certain number of soldiers. Well, in their harm, there's a risk assessment for bad precedents, for prolonging a war against terrorism, right? So if we compare these two, we tell you which is more detrimental, losing a few soldiers or letting a terrorist have the upper hand and financially benefiting them, right? So that they can continue to kidnap more innocent people, continue to keep on asking us for more ransoms. And we tell you because of that, closing opposition status quo models work. It has already worked in status quo, such as the raid on Entebbe and other things. And we tell you that status quo doesn't negotiate with terrorism. It's because governments want to keep the upper hand over terrorists. We don't want to give them the leverage. We don't want to look like we're bargaining over people. And it's because of that, we tell you from closing opposition, and we provided you a model on how status quo works, giving you a mutually exclusive benefit. And we tell you, look, there's no need to pay ransoms because we want to be fearful. Thank you.
Thank the member of opposition for his speech. Now to call upon the government whip to sum up the government's case. Here.
Mr. Speaker, as government whip, I'm going to do two things for you today. First, I'm going to rebut the opposition's case. And after that, I am going to elaborate on Gina's case, right? So firstly, starting off with rebuttals from to the Elders case. He was talking about how the US have only the US have the liability to stop these terrorists. But aren't we stopping them when we pay the ransom and we are saving our citizens? We feel that we are removing the terrorists' leverage over the US, because when they have our citizens, right, they have so much leverage over us. They have the leverage to say, oh, hey, I'm going to kill your citizen if you don't give me this and that. And that's what we want to give to them, because in the end, our citizens' life is more important than our political agenda. We feel that this is more important, right?
Yeah.
What the DLO gave us was that they have there's a higher chance for them to do it again, that we're giving them a platform. No, we are taking away their leverage over us. We believe that since they have so much leverage over us when they have our citizens, right, we are taking away their leverage when we take our citizens back and when we give them what they want. Sit down. And she was talking about how the people care about long-term harms. But when I see the ISIS beheading people, I feel that I was thinking to myself, why isn't the government doing anything about this? Why isn't the government taking them back instead of just letting them die, right? Sit down. And under opposition's paradigm, right, their side is making it worse. You're just emboldening them, because not only do you not care about whether they have political representation or not, you don't care if they live or die. You're just encouraging them to harm even more of your citizens. You're encouraging them to be just completely just start hating you. You're going to encourage them because, you know what? You don't care about whether they live or die. You don't care whether they have any political representation or not, and they're just going to hate you for that because they want you to acknowledge you, and that's what you're not doing under your paradigm. Sit down. Okay, look. The harms under their paradigm outweighs the benefits of their paradigm. Why, right? We've already told you that when you take when you don't give them what they want and you just let your citizens die at their hands, right? Sit down. We say that you're just giving them even more reasons to attack you. You're giving them more reasons to hate you. You're giving them more reasons to bomb your entire city and let all your citizens die. We don't want that to happen. As a government, we have a responsibility to protect our citizens, and this is what we want to do. Because if you let them kill your citizens, you let them torture your citizens, we don't want our citizens to be demoralized because they'll think our government isn't doing anything about this, and they'll create societal distrust, right? Sit down. Look, my member of government has already said, you're not, okay, a soldier consenting to do his duty, to do his job, and to sacrifice himself for his citizens, right? It's different from being sentenced to death. When a terrorist group holds you hostage, right? When they have you held hostage, you have almost no hope unless your government bails you out, which in this case is by paying ransom, right? In the most extreme case, let's look at ISIS when they behead your citizens and when they release videos about it. And in the least extreme case, years and years of torture, extreme torture where you are in pain and you're suffering, right? We feel that we don't want to let our citizens suffer even more, right? Because right now, under your paradigm, you're just letting your citizens suffer. You're letting them die, and you don't care whether your citizens die or live. You want to sit down. As government, you have a responsibility, and that's to protect the security of your citizens. They're being irresponsible when they say, oh, we're just going to let our citizens die over there because you know what? I don't want to pay a ransom. I don't want to give them a platform to do what they have already been doing, right? Closing.
All right. See, the reason we don't give them the platform is because we're in a way contributing to war against terrorism. Like what we're talking, closing opposition. We don't give them the financial aid. We don't legitimize them. Therefore, it helps with the United States against the war against terrorism. Whereas they are not contributing anything to the war against terrorism. So they're looking at the short-term benefits instead of the long-term benefits, which is the war against terrorism.
Look at it this way. Under your side, our so-called short-term benefit is just bringing back our people, right? Even if people and we pay them more ransoms, money can be made. Money can be restored, right? We don't think that we can bring back our people from the dead even when they die, when the terrorists kill them, okay? Sit down. Okay. So when you look at Gina's case, right, what was she talking about? She was talking about how these terrorists, you're letting your people die, right? That's number one. Number two, You don't care. You don't give a damn if your people are dying in another country, if your people are being tortured in another country, if your people are suffering, because you don't want the terrorists to have another platform for them to repeat their actions of what they've already done to your country, right? We feel that it's harmful to your country because look at it this way: what can be restored easier, life or money? We feel that it's money, right? It's obvious that you cannot bring anyone back from the dead when they're dead, right? You can't bring back someone out of their grave and restore their life after they've been killed and tortured by terrorists. Yes, opening. Yeah.
Your whole policy, your whole government is conceding to every other negotiation that a terrorist group gives you.
Every other negotiation that a terrorist group gives us is what we are going to give them. Because in the end, right, your citizen's life is more important than what you're going to give to them. Because in the end, you cannot bring back your citizens. You only can bring back what you've given them. Sit down, I just took one from you. Let's look at, like I was saying before, let's look at Gina's case, right? Why is what they're doing wrong? Every single one of your citizens is under your protection. Every single one of your citizens has the right to the government's protection over them. They aren't your pawns. They aren't people that you can just send out to die just because it's their job. We feel, like I've said before, consenting to do your duty, consenting to do your job is not the same as being killed by terrorists, because when these terrorists hold you hostage, they have complete power over life, or over your life, over whether you live or die, right? Okay. Even if these soldiers have consented to die, after they've been held hostage, right? Do you want to send a rescue mission in there which risks even more lives, or do you want to give the terrorists what they want and bring back your people? We feel that it's right that we give them what they want and bring back only one life. In the end, even if they take our ransom but they kill our people, right? It's more beneficial than sending in a rescue mission in which you can risk more lives, in which most probably more people will die, right? Okay. Also, the harms under their side right now. Okay. Under their side, right? Their soldiers, after you just let them die, right? Their soldiers can morally object to carrying out their orders, and we feel that it's very, very harmful. And with that, we are proud to.
The government waits for a speech. Now for the final speech of the debate, we invite the opposition wish to wrap up the side opposition's case and the debate.
I find it funny that closing government literally just conceded to the fact that we are negotiating with terrorists to give them what they want. Before I analyze more on that, let me talk about opening government. They came up here and told us that their objective is to that they are saving countless lives. Now the thing is, coming from the entire government bench is a proposal, is a case that is focused on a short-term proposal. On our side, on closing government side, we are proposing an alternative that is going to work more in the long run. They also talked about how they had this idea about how the hostages would gain information from the terrorists, so that the US could gain information. Now here's the thing: terrorists don't kidnap hostages with the objective of using it, with the objective of keeping them in the end. So we don't see how they are going to gain any information at all, because the terrorist is not going to go and tell them they're anything at all. And they're not going to tell anything at all. Instead, they're going to treat them like slaves. What makes you think that the terrorist is going to? What makes you think that the terrorist is going to provide information to the hostages? And also, they talked about how these hostages will be used as slaves and sex slaves and stuff. And we on side closing opposition believe that terrorists don't kidnap people or kidnap people with the objective of using them as slaves. They kidnap people, US citizens, with the objective of gaining money from the US and to legitimize their stance instead of gaining extra slaves. So we don't see how that point is valid. Please sit down, all of you. And then let's move on to closing government, right?
Gina came up here and talked about how the worth of the citizens is more important than the money wasted by US. See, the thing is, closing the whole of opposition actually is not coming up here and telling you the money is more important. What we're telling you is we don't believe in legitimizing the ideology of terrorists. We think that, please sit down. We think that Gina said that the worth is more important than fulfilling their political agenda. By fulfilling the terrorists' wants and needs, the ideology of terrorists is going to grow and it will increase future attacks. And by increasing future attacks, don't you think more lives will be risked? Please sit down. The whole government bench focuses on saving lives and saving citizens. But how is it that if a group of maybe 10 people were taken by the terrorists, how is it that by saving those 10 people, it's benefiting the US as a whole? What we think is their entire proposal is based on short-term benefits, and with our proposal, our entire proposal is based on the long run and how it would benefit the US and the citizens in the long run. Now, please sit down. What differs opening government and closing government is that opening government talked about how terrorists do these things for attention, and we completely agree with that. But opening opposition, sorry. But the reason we differ from them is because we don't we agree we don't want to assist terrorists. But the thing is, we are providing an alternative. The alternative is to stick to status quo, which is the right way to do it, which is with rescue missions and to send rescue teams. Because by sending rescue teams, we are not recognizing the terrorists as a threat so much as them that we are not afraid. We don't see why the US should show fear and give millions and millions of dollars to the terrorists, which will only help them in the war against terrorism. Please sit down. So what has side closing government opposition proved to you today, or what I'm proving to you today is that by going with government's case, we are legitimizing ideology, which is not good for long term for the long term. And we're also recognizing the terrorists as a threat, which is not a good idea, because then it makes it look not only to the US citizens but to the rest of the world that the terrorists have the upper hand. And this will definitely be a very, 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 very important harm when it comes to the war against terrorism. Now, here's the thing. We also think that the only harm that the government case can bring up about our proposal is that we are going to lose lives. Yes, we completely concede to the fact that we might lose lives, but we also think that it's more beneficial in the long run because it's more beneficial in the long run because we by not legitimizing the terrorist ideology, we are going to we are not giving them we're not giving them money or ransom, for example, to help them and to give them the upper hand in the war against terrorism, which is what our actual problem is. So we don't, and also by not paying the ransom, we are proving to the terrorists that the US doesn't have a pressure point to terrorists to exploit and and we are proving that we don't have a pressure point for terrorists to exploit, and that we won't give them what they want, which literally the government whip talked about how we are negotiating with terrorists to give them what they want, and we don't see how that's helping with the actual problem, which is terrorist attacks. And also, what has closing government told you today? Opposition, sorry. What has closing opposition told you today? We've told you that that recognizing terrorists as a threat would not benefit the US, and we told you that there is an alternative, and we also proved to you the flaws in legitimizing the ideologies. And with that, I'd like to ask my question.
Thank the opposition for a speech. Please cross the floor, shake hands, head back to the LT where we will announce the results.